Man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore. Marie-Louise von Franz, a Swiss psychologist, noticed a disturbing trend in the mid-20th century. Many men and women who were well into their adult years remained psychologically stunted in their maturation. They occupied the bodies of adults, but their mental development failed to keep pace. Von Franz saw this as such a pressing issue that in 1959 she gave a series of lectures on the psychology of the Puer Aeternus, which is Latin for eternal child. The term comes from ancient mythology, where gods like Iacchus, Bacchus, and Eros symbolize divine youth, which means eternal vitality, but also escapism, fantasy, and a refusal to face reality. Carl Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist and von Franz's teacher, rescued the mythological term Puer Aeternus and used it in the exploration of the psychology of eternal youth and the creative child within every person. It is an archetype, a primordial structural element of the psyche, and like all archetypes, has both a positive and a negative side. It can bring the energy, beauty, and creativity of childhood into adult life, or thwart self-realization and doom us to unrealistic adolescent fantasies, experiencing life as a prison. Carl Jung had used the term to describe the individual who fails to grow up, like Peter Pan in the fairy tale, the boy who wouldn't grow up, who lives in Neverland, a place where people cease to age and are eternally young. The Puer Aeternus is also known as the Peter Pan syndrome. In one of her lectures, von Franz describes the Puer Aeternus as the individual who remains too long in adolescent psychology. That is, all those characteristics that are normal in a youth of 17 or 18 are continued into later life. A Puer or Puella avoids individuation and fights against his or her inner drive towards psychological wholeness. This stunts growth. While they have a great imagination and rich inner life, they do not bring it into consciousness and thus do not progress in life. The potential remains hidden and unused, stored away in the depths of the unconscious. The Puer will often choose the blue pill over the red pill. These are those who find themselves unable to commit to work, to form satisfactory relationships, to commit to the discipline of education, to carry the weight of responsibility, or who feel that their life has become meaningless. They will find the integration of the archetype of eternal youth invaluable in their life. The negative aspects of the Puer Aeternus refer to a certain young man who remains too long in adolescence, usually coupled with too great a dependence on the mother. The natural response of a mother is to protect her child. However, when the child is kept in the comfort of the nest for too long, he is unable to face the trials and tribulations of life when he grows up. He therefore flees from the cold world and seeks his childhood under the nourishing and protecting circle of the mother. It is the unconscious temptation to return to the womb. This creates a mother complex. The puer is the man-child who refuses to grow up, take responsibility, and face life's challenges. He expects other people, typically his parents, to solve all his problems. Among the male population of the Western world, many young men are struggling academically, socially, spiritually, financially, and sexually. They are living at home into their late 20s and 30s, choosing to remain in the comforting confines of their parents' care rather than testing the unknown waters of independence. Instead of striving to create something of themselves, many prefer the familiar and comfortable virtual worlds. They are passive wanderers in life with no path or purpose, save the pursuit of momentary pleasure to ease their suffering. Since he lacks zest for learning, he never develops a proper understanding of anything. Von Franz writes, "Such people usually have great difficulty in finding a job, for whatever they find is never quite right or quite what they wanted. There is always a hair in the soup. The woman is never quite the right woman. She is nice as a girlfriend, but there is always a but which prevents marriage or any kind of commitment." The puer is aware of the transitoriness of life, so he does not give himself wholeheartedly to any experience. He knows that the end will be disappointment and a parting. This is a very serious problem, which von Franz termed as Puer Aeternus. In this condition, the puer is always getting ready to say goodbye, which makes it more likely for the experience to end, thus erroneously reinforcing his beliefs even more. It is a typical pathological reaction of the puer to train himself not to suffer by anticipating suffering. He anticipates the disappointment in order not to suffer the blow, and that is a refusal to live. It seems to him the rational thing to do, but thinking too much is a disease. He gets stuck in his own reflective hyperconsciousness, a self-created bubble that isolates him from life. If one looks deeper, one will find that he has a cherished fantasy life within. The Puer may become a megalomaniac and think of himself as someone special and exceptional, a hidden genius, or the next big philosopher, but he has no tangible product to show his genius. He is an artist without art. He is the scribbler who fills his shelves with the dreams in his head without ever mating his quill and parchment. The Puer daydreams and engages in passive fantasy, which is very different from Jung's technique of active imagination. Such a person is missing a sense of identity, which results in disquieting feelings of fragmentation and worthlessness. The Puer compensates in his behavior by pursuing the ecstatic high in drugs, alcohol, sex, sport, and daredevil escapades that transcends the inner depression which threatens fragmentation, granting an illusion of selfhood, which underlies his restless search for that state of stability and harmony. The person living provisionally is alienated from his own reality, spending his time ruminating on fantasies that go nowhere and achieve nothing. In the ancient Greek fable, the astrologer who fell into a well, Thales of Miletus, considered the first philosopher, is said to have been so lost in thought that while gazing at the stars, he fell into a well. How should one have knowledge of the heavenly things above if one knows not what is beneath one's feet? While the Puer has a vivid imagination, he is not capable of transforming these insights into action because he lives in an ethereal realm and misses the blood and guts of life on earth. As a result, the Puer is not very successful in life. Von Franz writes, "In actuality, for instance, he gets up at 10:30 a.m., hangs around till lunchtime with a cigarette in his mouth, giving way to his emotions and fantasies. In the afternoon, he means to do some work, but first goes out with friends and then with a girl, and the evening is spent in long discussions about the meaning of life. He then goes to bed at 1, and the next day is a repetition of the one before. In that way, the capacity for life and the inner riches are wasted, for they cannot get into something meaningful but slowly overgrow the real personality. The individual walks about in a cloud of fantasies, fantasies which in themselves are interesting and full of rich possibilities, full of unlived life. You feel that such a person has a tremendous wealth and capacity, but there is no possibility of finding a means of realization. The Puer usually has a great capacity to assimilate the contents and to listen, so that it seems that he is going to implement them. But he never applies the concepts he has learned, for he is not grounded enough in reality. It is a trick which the Puer performs. The realization that they should adapt to reality is an intellectual idea to them, which they fulfill in fantasy but not in reality. Though it might seem simple, the Puer is unable to cross the border from fantasy to action. The word human derives from the Latin word humus, which means earth. To be human is to be humble, down to earth, and grounded in earthly experience, which contains a rich source of nutrients that heals us. The Puer is like Icarus, who in Greek mythology is warned about hubris and not to fly too close to the sun. However, he ignores this instruction and flies so close to the sun that his wings melt. He falls from the sky, plunges into the sea, and drowns. Jung writes, "The provisional life, where one does not exist really, they are only a spectator, so any experience is ghost-like, perfectly abstract, without a trace of realization." Jung tells the story of a 25-year-old girl who had an extreme case of provisional life, which led to her suicide. She proved to be absolutely inaccessible. She lived things, she did things, but she did not know what she was living. No matter how hard Jung tried, nothing touched her, because she had no relation to the world at all. A few months later, she shot herself. Jung writes, "I saw the corpse. She had shot herself through the heart in the street and had not lost consciousness for a minute or two. The expression on her face was completely altered. For a long time, I stood watching her face and asking myself, what kind of expression is that? It was the most extraordinary, the expression of someone who was convinced, say, that a thing was black, and to whom it was very important that it was black, but to whom one had finally proven that it was red, and it was as if she suddenly realized it was red. It was a look full of bewilderment and a sort of pleasant surprise. I saw what happened. At the moment when she shot herself, she understood what life was for the first time. Sometimes people have to injure themselves very badly in order to awaken to what life really is. This shows how deeply unconscious people often are. The inner world must complement the outer world and vice versa. An over-reliance on the inner world, in which the ego cannot get out of Neverland, will make it impossible to advance into adulthood. As this becomes more and more of a crisis, the unconscious starts to seep in and threatens to overwhelm and drown the ego. Whatever one has within oneself but does not live grows against one. There are also children that become mature too early and grow up very quickly, the extreme opposite of the puer. These are neglected children. The hardships of life have forced them to become very realistic, independent, and disillusioned. You can generally tell from a bitter and falsely mature expression that something went wrong. They were pushed out of the childhood world too soon. Such people cannot love nor trust anybody. In that situation, life has no meaning because they have lost the magical aspect of the eternal youth. They always feel not quite real, only half alive. In therapy, the analyst has the difficult task of guiding them back to their childish fantasies in order to deal with them correctly. The eternal child also contains many positive qualities, a spirituality which comes from close contact with the unconscious. The puer is agreeable, has the charm of youth, and starts invigorating and deep conversations. He appears as the divine child who symbolizes newness, potential for growth, and hope for the future. Friedrich Nietzsche understood the importance of this. In fact, he considered the child to be the final metamorphosis to becoming who one is. He writes, "The child is innocence and forgetfulness, a new beginning, a game, a self-propelling wheel, a first motion, a sacred yes. For the game of creating, my brothers, a sacred yes to life is needed." What is meant by the inner child is that which is born from the maturity of the adult. It is not a regression toward an infantile state of life, but a progression toward wholeness. We all have an inner child within us, even older people, who sometimes appear to return to the childlike state of innocence. The eternal youth is one who is immersed in the moment and filled with wonder and playfulness, giving way to pure creativity. He is a yes-sayer, the pinnacle of life affirmation. He brings the heavenly realm into his earthly existence. A passage from the Bible reads, "Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." As we grow older, we enter the world of the senex, which is Latin for old man. He too possesses positive and negative aspects. Positively, he is a balanced person who is grounded, patient, conscientious, risk-averse, and controlled. Here he appears as the archetype of the wise old man. The negative side of the senex is cynicism, rigidity, materialism, reluctance to change, and a lack of a sense of humor. The senex is the opposite of the puer archetype, though they must be seen as the opposite sides of the same coin. We recognize youth by knowing age. We become aware of aging by remembering how we were when young. Jung writes, "The puer's shadow is the senex, associated with the god Apollo, disciplined, controlled, responsible, rational, ordered. Conversely, the shadow of the senex is the puer, related to Dionysus, unbounded, instinct, disorder, intoxication, whimsy. The puer dreams big, the senex works hard. The ratio of one to the other varies from person to person. Both archetypes live within us, and both are necessary for a psychologically healthy life. A one-sided imbalance in either direction is not advisable. The puer and senex have different versions of play. While the puer enjoys sports, socializing, games, eating out, going to the movies, etc., which are all non-tangible products, the senex feels that play is engaging in a non-work activity that produces a tangible result: painting, cooking, writing, building, and so on. Jung was primarily a senex. He would make sculptures, carve inscriptions on stone, draw mandalas, and create the Red Book, full of images from the unconscious. In one of the most difficult periods of his life, which he called his confrontation with the unconscious, Jung felt a psychic disturbance in himself and went twice through all his childhood memories to try to find the cause of the disturbance. But this retrospection led to nothing but a fresh acknowledgement of his own ignorance. He said to himself, Since I know nothing at all, I shall simply do whatever occurs to me. He writes, "The first thing that came to the surface was a childhood memory from perhaps my 10th or 11th year. At that time, I had a spell of playing passionately with building blocks. I distinctly recalled how I had built little houses and castles. These structures had fascinated me for a long time. To my astonishment, this memory was accompanied by a good deal of emotion. Aha, I said to myself, there is still life in these things. The small boy is still around and possesses a creative life which I lack. But how can I make my way to it?" Jung realized that he had been neglecting his inner child. He felt humiliated to realize that he had to play childish games in his old age. Nevertheless, he started gathering stones and slowly built a miniature village. He went to his building game after the noon meal every day, until his patients arrived, and if he finished with his work early enough in the evening, he went back to building. In the course of this activity, his thoughts clarified, and he felt a source of creativity, enthusiasm, and a sense of renewal. He wrote, "This moment was a turning point in my fate. I had only the inner certainty that I was on the way to discovering my own myth. For the building game was only a beginning. It released a stream of fantasies which I later carefully wrote down." The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is one of the most well-known books in the world. He displays all the typical features of the Puer Aeternus, which, however, does not alter the fact that he was also a great writer. He worked as a professional aviator and died during World War II in an airplane crash. When he was not allowed to fly, he always became depressed, walking up and down in his flat from morning till evening, desperate and irritated. In the book, Saint-Exupéry begins with an introduction, like part of a personal autobiographical account. The book is based on the imagination of children and is very dreamlike. The narrator starts by saying that at the age of 6, he read about boa constrictors swallowing their prey whole without chewing them, after which they are unable to move and sleep through the 6 months that they need for digestion. His first drawing, which looks ordinary, has the entire mystery of Saint-Exupéry's life in it. He shows his masterpiece to the grown-ups and asks them whether the drawing frightened them, but they say, "Why should anyone be frightened by a hat?" But his drawing was not a picture of a hat. It was a picture of a boa constrictor digesting an elephant. Since they were not able to understand it, he made another drawing. He draws inside of the boa constrictor so that they can see the elephant clearly, since adults always need to have things explained. The grown-ups respond by advising him to lay aside his drawings and focus on studying arithmetic, geography, grammar, etc. That is why, at the age of 6, he gave up what might have been a magnificent career as a painter. He then chose another profession and learned to pilot airplanes, having flown all over the world. Whenever he met a grown-up, he would show them drawing number 1 to find out if that person was of true understanding, but they would always say it looks like a hat. So he lived his whole life alone, without anyone that he could really talk to, until he had an accident with his plane in the desert. This experience is linked with his personal life, in which he nearly died of thirst and experienced hallucinations. As he was trying to fix the plane, he heard an odd little voice say, "If you please, draw me a sheep." It was the little prince, who had come down from the stars. He shows him the hat, and the little prince says that he doesn't want a boa constrictor that swallowed an elephant. He wants a sheep. This magical being from the unconscious is the first person he has met that understood him. However, he does not know how to draw a sheep, and after several failures, he draws a box instead, and in a tricksterish fashion says that the sheep he wants is inside it, for he is too busy trying to fix the engine of his plane. This symbolizes the conflict between the demands of the inner and outer life, which poses a tremendous tension. A common thing that a puer does is to put all his plans in a box and store them away, in a gesture of boredom and impatience. This is the great danger. Perhaps the most important thing a puer can do is to take something seriously and to stick to it. This first part of the novella contains the whole problem of the Puer Aeternus in a nutshell. We see that Saint-Exupéry has never really gotten used to living in the world of the adult. He was experiencing depression and disillusionment. It was as if his unconscious were saying to him that he must participate in the world and cannot always escape the unimaginative and banal world of everyday life. He felt as if his soul had been completely dried up and that he was dying of thirst, hence the image of the desert. This midlife crisis leads to conscious absent-mindedness, and one little mistake can cost one's life. The adult world lacks the enchantment of nature and the magic found in fairy tales. It is totally dead. Saint-Exupéry writes, "I know a planet where there is a certain red-faced gentleman. He has never smelled a flower. He has never looked at a star. He has never loved anyone. He has never done anything in his life but add up figures. And all day he says over and over, just like you, I am busy with matters of consequence, and that makes him swell up with pride." Saint-Exupéry speaks about the emptiness, idiocy, and meaninglessness of adulthood, and that the childhood life is the fantasy life, the artist's life, the true life. All the rest is empty persona, running after making money, making a prestige impression on other people, and having lost one's true nature. The great problem is that he has not found a bridge by which he could take over the true life into the adult life. The English poet William Wordsworth wrote about this poignantly. "There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth, and every common sight, to me did seem apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore, turn wheresoe'er I may, by night or day. The things which I have seen I now can see no more. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. At length the man perceives it die away and fade into the light of common day." The fundamental question is, how can one grow up without losing the feeling of totality, the feeling of creativeness, magic, and of being really alive, which one had in youth? What is really going on in Saint-Exupéry's life is that his greater personality has been devoured by the mother, which suffocates life and prevents the human being from development and growth. One is permanently in the womb and never leaves the mother's protective shell to go into the adult world. The great mother becomes the devouring mother, like the Hindu goddess Kali. Saint-Exupéry never embarks on the hero's journey, and that is the meaning of the elephant in the drawing, which is the greatest hero in Africa. In contrast to other mythological parallels, the swallowed hero cannot find his way out of his predator. The elephant is generous, intelligent, taciturn, but irritable and inclined to terrible moods and fits of rage, which can only be appeased by music, not by sensual pleasures. Amazingly, these were also the outstanding qualities of Saint-Exupéry. The elephant is the image in his soul of what he wanted to become, and it's swallowed back by the devouring mother, the regressive tendencies of the unconscious, and later by death. But Saint-Exupéry did not know that, though von Franz says he came very close. To integrate the Puer Aeternus, one must bring oneself down to earth, not by having a one-sided view on the life of fantasy, but rather by exposing oneself to daily life, chores, and hard work. The poor must also merge with the crowd, to become the sheep that Saint-Exupéry put into a box, though this isn't without its dangers. A dangerous situation is cured by a dangerous situation. However, it is the antidote for a mother complex. Normally, very few young men have a strong enough individuality to pull away from the mother of their own accord. They do it via collectivity. This is the first step of the cure. It is only by immersing oneself in society that one can experience the warmth of human beings, have relatedness, and a sense of being part of a tribe that transcends individual desires and needs. The second step is that the poor must take care not to lose himself in the crowd. He must simultaneously sacrifice his inflated specialness and megalomania, which is his fake individuality, and not lose his real individuality by becoming a mere number in the crowd. This can be done by balancing one's social life with one's spiritual life, for if one never spends time alone, one may never build an indestructible foundation, which is crucial for self-realization. Nietzsche wrote, "When I am among the many, I live as the many do, and I do not think as I really think. After a time, it always seems as though they want to banish me from myself and rob me of my soul, and I grow angry with everybody and fear everybody. I then require the desert, so as to grow good again." Jung likened the human lifespan to the passage of the sun over the course of 12 hours. The sun rises and we begin the day, birth. The sun rises in the sky. We grow from infancy to youth to young adulthood. The sun comes to the zenith at noontime, midlife, the peak of our abilities, vigor, and, if we have been on the right path, career success. Then the sun begins to lose its altitude, we begin to age. Until it finally sets, we die. These phases of life have different priorities and specific types of psychology. For Jung, the priority of the first half of life is a strengthening of the ego, work, education, relationships, and so on. It is only in the second half of life that we are sufficiently anchored in reality, and our focus shifts to our inner world, to our quest for individuation. An imbalance in this transition is often the start of a midlife crisis, the cry of the soul for growth. Jung writes, "The significance of the morning of life undoubtedly lies in the development of the individual, our entrenchment in the outer world, the propagation of our kind, and the care of our children. This is the obvious purpose of nature. Whoever carries over into the afternoon of life the law of the morning, or the natural aim, must pay for it with damage to his soul, just as surely as a growing youth who tries to carry over his childish egoism into adult life must pay for this mistake with social failure."